Today I have the honor of introducing Alma DeMetropolis, Managing Director and New Jersey Market President for our lead sponsor, JPMorgan Chase. But before I introduce Alma, since the theme for this conference is empowering women for the global conversation, I thought it would be appropriate to provide some quick highlights about our lead sponsor and Alma's amazing organization. As a global firm, JPMorgan Chase attracts talent from around the world and across a range of backgrounds. Their diverse workforce helps them better understand and serve their clients, customers, and the communities in which they do business, and they invest heavily in their employees and in their success. Women make up half of JPMorgan's global workforce and are represented at every level within the organization. Yes, that deserves a round of applause. JPMorgan Chase believes in providing every woman with a range of tools and programs to help them thrive because they know that each woman's individual success is critical to the success of their business. As such, JPMorgan Chase advances the economic well-being of women in several ways. For their employees, they have targeted resource groups, training and mentoring programs, which empowers JPMorgan Chase's employees for their own careers. In the communities, they've targeted global philanthropic investments that are helping women to improve their financial health, gain well-paying jobs, create opportunity-rich communities, and grow their own small businesses. In 2016 alone, JPMorgan Chase Foundation donated over $17 million to organizations supporting pathways for opportunities for women. And Alma DeMetropolis is an instrumental part of all of this in making this happen. So I think that JPMorgan Chase and Alma deserve a round of applause. There's so much to say about Alma, but I've been told that I only have a couple of minutes, so I'll just briefly read her bio. Alma provides executive leadership across the firm's line of businesses as well as both community and employment engagement. She has been advising families, endowments, and foundations on a broad range of wealth matters and managing investment portfolios for over 20 years. We know that she looks like she's 20, but she's been doing this for over 20 years, and joined JPMorgan in 1992. She has also worked for 7 years on foreign assignments in Latin America and in Europe. It is my distinct honor and my pleasure to welcome my colleague, my friend, my dear sister, Alma DeMetropolis, to the stage.
Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you so much, Tamara, for that. That was a lot. But really, I am thankful for all of you being here. First, let me extend a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Sue Henderson for hosting us here and making this possible. Obviously, Daryl Rand, who is the visionary and had put this all together. We cannot be more thankful for this. And on behalf of JPMorgan Chase, thank you to all of you for being here today. In our panel discussion today, we definitely want to talk about how we're building wealth for women and promoting financial health. In the world that we live in, one's financial health is critical and connected to all the other personal aspects of our decisions and our lives. It's imperative that we solve this, our economic security, in the years ahead, because it's not just about women. It's actually about children, about families, about communities. So we need to solve for this. Today, through our esteemed panelists, we'll dive deeper into the understanding of having awareness of the profound gap between income and wealth for females versus males, like what's really driving that gap, what are the warning signs, what are the things we need to do now in our personal lives to have better outcomes, how can innovation and technology and tools really help us, because wealth is very different from income. It's basically trying to have the resources to hopefully build your personal lives, to build your own businesses, to build for retirement. And so all this is critical as you embrace your families over the long run. And so with that backdrop, I want to get started to introduce our three panelists. So the first one, Colleen, let me have you come up here. So Colleen joins us from the JP Chase Philanthropy and Corporate Responsibility Group. She's responsible for us helping establish our financial capabilities and community development programs, including the financial solutions lab that we have. So Colleen's out there scouring the whole landscape for new and innovative approaches to community challenges and improving financial outcomes. Colleen attended UNC Chapel Hill and Yale Business School. Let me ask Samantha Kinney to please join us. So Samantha Kinney joins us from the Neighborhood Trust Financial Partners. The mission of her organization is to help individuals become productive participants in the U.S. financial system by providing financial counseling, teaching financial literacy, having workshops, and providing all the tools to empower financial decision making. And Samantha spent some time at the U.S. Peace Corps, right? You went to undergrad Boston U and pursuing her master's at Fordham. And our third panelist, Ranjini, please join us up here. She's co-founder and president of Artech Information Systems. She founded this in 1992, this firm, while attending Yale Law School. Ranjini came to the United States from India at the age of 8. Her company specializes in staffing, recruiting talent for IT, engineering, and other professional jobs for over 70 different global and Fortune 500 companies. And I believe she now employs 8,000 people?
About 7,000.
About 7,000 people. Wow, from employee number one. So look at that. So thank you, ladies, for joining us. So let me hop up here with you because I want to be in this conversation. So the first topic, can everyone hear me? Yep, great. Okay, so the first topic, we all know too many people lack the tools and the resources to manage their daily lives, whether unexpected emergencies or plan for the future. Approximately 57% of adults struggle financially. Many are dealing with unhealthy amount of debt or sporadic saving habits. We also know that for women, this is particularly challenging. And it's all been very well reported that on average, women make less than men, 79 cents on the dollar. But even more troubling is that women, on average, actually only own 32 cents for every dollar that's owned by men. And sadly enough, this gender wealth gap is even more profound when we break it down by race or marital status. And so with that, Colleen, let me ask you the first question. So what's driving this wealth gap? Apart from wages themselves, what are the, what's the difference between men and women? What's happening here?
Yeah, well, first, I think it's so exciting that we're having this conversation because you're right, so much of the conversation has really been around the income gap, which is absolutely part of the challenge. But what we found is that really sort of the wealth inequities are much larger. And that if you fix the income problem, it's actually not going to address the wealth problem. So for example, never married women working full-time actually earn 97 cents to the dollar, or 97% of what males earn, but they own 1/3 of the wealth. So clearly, income alone is sort of not the only solution. But we have seen that that's one of the key drivers. I mean, obviously, you can't have a conversation about what's going to decrease the wealth gap without talking about the income disparities. And part of what's driving the income disparities, as many of us know, is we've seen that women often are not part of the sort of high growth job sectors. We've also seen that they often, there's a host of structural barriers, there's a host of other challenges. But I think it's important to note that even if we address the income problem, we haven't tackled the wealth problem. So while it's a driver, it's one driver. Some of the other drivers that we've seen that are really undermining sort of the wealth gains of women have really been focused on caregiving responsibilities, so that even if women are earning more income, they're forced to spread that out over more people because they're often taking care of others. And we've also seen the cost of caregiving are increasing. So these can also sort of undermine their ability to build their assets and acquire more wealth. But some of the other challenges that we're seeing is around really debt and credit. So we often talk about on the debt side that women sort of have a debt anchor that's really holding them back from pursuing a lot of their dreams. So here in the US, women on average have about 177% of the debt load as their male counterparts, We see that they typically have higher debt across multiple categories, particularly around student loans, which is increasing. But we also just released a report last week that showed medical payments are really sort of leaving women in a worse position than their male counterparts. So after they make a very large medical payment, they're typically having much higher credit card burdens than their male counterparts. And then the flip side of that is the credit challenges that many women often, this is a problem pervasive in the US that women often, or that everyone has trouble with their credit scores. Roughly half of Americans have, what we consider suboptimal credit scores, but it particularly harms women as they try to acquire if they try to get low-cost debt to be able to sort of pursue some of their dreams, such as building a home or building a business. And over the course of your life, if you have a poor credit score, that costs you more than $200,000 in higher interest rates that you're paying. So that's obviously sort of holding people back. The final piece, that I think we'll talk about more in this conversation is that we just see tremendous barriers to asset accumulation for women across a lot of different areas. In particular, home ownership, small business and micro-entrepreneurship, and I know we'll talk about that more, and then retirement savings. So as we think about sort of how we're helping people get ahead with their assets, we've really got to think about how we're helping them sort of overcome those barriers, but then also address these liability issues as well.
Great, and I've also recently read too that on the healthcare side, something that's a bit troubling is that women sometimes are putting off healthcare care for themselves until they actually have the money available to actually pay for that health care. So Samantha, let me ask you, what are the trends are you seeing, and what are some of the tools that can help close that gap of these issues that Colleen just shared with us?
So I do financial counseling, mostly in New York City, and I see a lot of the same trends that you were just talking about. So I teach a workshop, financial literacy workshop, and it's mostly women, working women, either single mothers, mostly mothers. And some things I see that hold them back are store credit cards, which is like buying usually clothes for their children, things like that. As far as savings, one thing that I see work very well are SUSUs. I don't know if people are familiar with those, but they're group savings. So with your coworkers or your family members, you each put in weekly, and then you get a pot at the end. So I see that as a successful saving strategy a lot. And I coach them on how to save, so how to think for the future when you're thinking every day, kind of putting out fires in crises, to think more long-term, to have a saving strategy, have a savings goal. So that's a really big, if you have a motivation and a goal that you're working towards, it kind of can starve off temptation when you're looking forward towards your house or getting out of debt or your child's tuition. Something to keep you motivated, I think, starves off temptation. And then a strategy of how to reach that goal. So having a specific strategy of how much you put away every paycheck, how to have a safe savings account that doesn't charge you fees, things like that. And then to put as many barriers in front of you and your savings. So if it's very close to your checking account, you can just transfer between the two. But if you put it farther away, so actually physically far, or if it's an internet bank, whatever, makes it harder for you to reach that savings. So once you have it, you don't pull out of it very often.
And so do you ever talk about credit score and sort of the benefits or non-benefits of having debt, for example?
Yeah, so credit scores are a very hot topic. People want to improve their credit, and a lot of people come to you and they're trying to move. So to get a house, to rent an apartment, a landlord's going to pull your credit score, and when you have a damaged credit score, it's very hard to get into housing. So that's a very hot topic, and as well as student loans, I see a lot. Store credit cards, again, are some of the highest interest rates, like 25.99%. Really hold people back, and they are paying their minimums, but they're not seeing their debt go down. So I see that as a big problem. People say, I'm paying this much a month, but my debt's the same. It doesn't seem to be going down.
So Ranjini, let me ask you, I mean, there's good debt and there's bad debt.
Right.
And I'm sure over the course of your lifetime, you've experienced maybe both of those sides of the equation. So tell us, how did you use debt to your benefit in either building your business or in your personal life? Share some of that.
Sure. So some of what both of you said resonated with me quite a bit. When I went to grad school, I had taken out some student loans in order to pay for it. I worked both summers, between law school. and was fairly well compensated as a summer associate. So I used that money to pay to pay for the education. And I think the difference, what I did versus what I saw quite a few of my friends doing, were I think I economized on my lifestyle while going through law school so that I didn't have as much debt. Whereas a lot of my friends were still living sort of the same life as if they were making money. And they were taking out loans to pay for their tuition and their room and board. And my thought process was, I really don't want to have debt. I mean, the sooner I can eliminate it, the better. And then after I graduated, I had student loans. I had co-founded Artech when I was in law school, but then I worked at a large law firm for several years before coming back to the company full time. And when I joined my law firm, I was being pretty well paid. And again, I saw a lot of my colleagues, young associates who were really spending pretty much everything that they were making. And I think my philosophy was more, pay the maximum amount of my debt off first, and live fine, but not by the $3,000 handbag just because you're making a paycheck that allows you to do it. So I think it was a little bit more if it was just the philosophy in terms of getting rid of the student debt and waiting to get the rewards of making money a little bit longer. I think I paid off my student loans within 3 or 4 years, which I think from what I see, and it was substantial. I graduated over 20 years ago, but for that time, I did have substantial student loans. But it was possible because I was making a good salary. So I think it is, that would conceivably be bad debt. I'm not sure. Obviously,
no, it was a good debt.
That's a good debt.
Invested in yourself.
But I don't think so. If that's good debt, I don't think I really had bad debt in terms of credit card. I think it's more about just living within your means, so you're not taking out credit card debt to pay for your lifestyle. The second part of it is a lot of companies start off with personal debt. And we were fortunate in that we raised some money from friends and family to start the company off. And it ran out pretty quickly, so we kind of knew we had a deadline for making sure we were successful. I think that's what it ultimately came down to, that you could see the money that we had invested initially sort of, okay, we're not getting the revenue, but we've spent the money, so what do we do? And it really made us have a high sense of urgency to get success really quickly.
So as you continue to build your business, there were occasions where there was additional debt or not needed because you were successfully growing?
Yeah, there's obviously debt, but it was funded through bank financing. And I think for the most part, a lot of small businesses do have trouble getting bank financing, but I think the point is to cross that critical line where you are viable, you show the profitability year over year. And I think we were fairly, we were able to cross that line fairly quickly in a few years. So once you do have that history of, 2 or 3 years of profitability and, no one's going to loan you, excessive amounts of money, but the banks will loan you enough in order for you to continue to grow. And sometimes it's more seeking out the banking relationships where people are willing to take the risk on you. I know there were turning points where, from a commercial financing standpoint, our current banking relationship was not, willing to extend that. And then we shopped around, but then we discovered that they actually were. We were just engaged at a branch level as opposed to the commercial bank. So it's also understanding, what at a branch maybe they're only allowed to loan X amount, but if you go to the commercial bank, then their limits are higher. So it's also navigating that.
Right. Excellent. Let me switch over now to retirement and savings, because I think perhaps the wealth gap is most magnified when it comes to retirement. Women are 80% more likely to live in poverty than men by the age of 65. So retirement savings, Social Security payments, personal savings levels seem to be far lower for women than men, yet women are living longer. So Colleen, with that, what are you finding the reasons for this?
Yeah, so we often talk about, retirement in sort of the three-legged stool here in the US. Obviously, we sort of adapt that for international contexts. But we typically think about it as, a pension plan, typically defined benefit or defined contribution that many people get at their workplace. Here in the US, Social Security. In other countries, we know there's sort of other government-funded programs that help augment retirement. And then the final is sort of their personal savings. And what we find is that women have lower rates of savings in each one of those categories. So we are seeing that women are not prepared for aging, especially given the fact that they are living longer. And in addition to that, we often see they're the ones, as I mentioned earlier, they're the caregivers. They're the ones taking care of their children and often of their extended family members. So not only are they living longer, but the burdens are often higher, and yet they aren't getting sort of the savings reserves that they need to be prepared for retirement and for older age. And so some of the things that we're sort of seeing as driving that is really sort of, again, getting back to that income gap. Obviously, it makes it harder when you don't have the income to be able to put into savings. But we also see, some structural barriers as well, that it's not just, again, as about, the individual sort of income piece, but also on the employer savings plans, we're also seeing just sort of a shift in general where employers are moving away from some of the defined benefit programs to more of the defined contribution model, which does put a little bit more of the risk on on the workers and on the employees. And in particular, we're seeing that women tend to not participate in these plans and as high of a rate. And that's typically because many of them are part-time workers here in the US. So they're twice as likely as males to be part-time workers and not always qualify for those workplace solutions. Or they might work for smaller firms. Here in the U.S., roughly 50% of all businesses with less than 50 employees are not offering sort of employer-sponsored retirement plans. And so women who are working in those environments might not have the tools sort of available to them. The second or the third piece of this, as I mentioned earlier, is sort of the piece of, again, because of these higher debt loads, it makes it harder for savings. So we've really got to figure out that debt piece because it is getting in the way of sort of their long-term savings goal. And then the fourth area is getting back to that personal savings bucket. So much of what we talk about is sort of long-term retirement security. But when, here in the US, half of Americans couldn't come up with $400 without borrowing or selling something, people are focused on the short term at the expense of the long term very often. And so what that means is that we've really got to think about how do we help shore up women's financial health in the short term through emergency savings accounts and other tools so that they're prepared for any of those expected shocks, but then able to build that cushion so they can start thinking about their long-term goals. We often see people dipping into their 401ks to pay for unexpected emergencies. That's problematic. We've really got to figure out how do we shore up women's financial health in the short term and then put them on a path so that they can start savings for the long term as well. And I think, there's also this sort of perception that people don't save. Women in particular save a lot. Even in developing markets, we see that women are saving 10 to 15% of their earnings. And these could be very poor households. It just might be informal savings. It might be that we're seeing people put it in their drawers, put it on their mattress, as some of my grantees have seen with many of their clients. Or it could be, we see sometimes buying extra stock at their businesses. They're doing it in all these informal ways. So part of what we also think about is how do we formalize that and get women into sort of the formal account so that their money is safe and secure and that, again, they can start sort of building for the long term.
So Samantha, what do you tell some of your women that you're coaching? When's the right time to start saving?
I usually tell them immediately. So like she was saying, women are really good savers in a way. Sometimes it's stretching $1. So they may not be putting in a bank account, but they know the best place to shop, the best place to get cheap clothes, cheap food. So they really know how to stretch $1. So if you do an employee-sponsored plan, it's pre-tax money, and it will lower your take-home pay. But I think we can all think of a time when we made less and spent less. So I find if your paycheck is smaller, you make do with that. So even if you can put away 1 or 2% and your employee matches it and you get another 1 or 2%, then you're at least, it's a little bit, but it's going to build over time, and time passes before you know it. You're 5 years or 10 years at a company and you have a chunk of money saved. And as she said, you can use it for emergency savings. It's not ideal. But if you need to dip into it, usually you can get a loan against your own money for 4%, 5%, because it's secured. So if you have high debt, at some point, if you find yourself with 25% credit cards, you can dip into that retirement as long as you're going to pay it back. But it's 4% versus 25% credit card. It can be used as emergency, and if you really do need it and you have your back up against the wall, I see a lot of women do it. So I usually recommend as soon as possible, because you're going to wish you did at some point.
Right. Ranjini, as an employer, what are the trends that you see, or what do you see your workers doing? And Colleen talked about pension plans like 401k. What are you seeing in your workforce?
Yeah, so as an employer, I think we can probably do a lot more in terms of financial education for our employees. I mean, we do have the financial institutions that we're engaged with. They do come in and do workshops in terms of how to bank more efficiently, or how to leverage the 401k. Also, even in terms of purchasing health insurance, because we have 2 or 3 different options in terms of our employer plans, and depending on your personal health care situation, people sometimes tend to overbuy health insurance. So all of those sorts of things we do offer, but I think I was talking to you in preparing for this panel, it came to me that we could probably do more, basic education in terms of how saving early on impacts your long-term life. We have a lot of young employees who are in their 20s, and at that age, you don't really think about it. So
and you're not alone with that. I mean, we at JP Morgan feel the same way, which is why we have Colleen to help find those technology solutions. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think technology is a game changer for a lot of this work. I've been working in this field for a long time, and it's always been a question of how do we make it profitable and affordable to serve segments that might not always be profitable and affordable, but technology changes all of that. Technology is changing and reinventing the business models of how we can think about serving different communities in a way that we haven't been able to before. We have the best data that we've ever had on consumer needs. As we know, we are not a homogenous group. I always struggle with this, with calling that we're going to target women, as if we're all the same. So the more that we can get that data to sort of customize tools, understand our needs and preferences, that provides a huge opportunity for us to create better solutions designed to meet your needs. And then finally, it makes it more convenient. Technology is a way for us to reach people where they are. So, women who are, as we know, doing multiple things, often working 2 jobs, or balancing a lot of things, it really helps if we've got technology as a facilitator to sort of bring these, through your smartphone or through your, phone in emerging economies in a way that's more convenient is a game changer for us. And we're seeing actually in international context in particular, being able to save your money confidentially is a huge way to empower women, because sometimes that's been a challenge for them, and technology enables us to do that. Here in the US, we're seeing new tools pop up. So for example, some of the ones that we're supporting is, eCredit Hero is an example of one that's helping repair credit. And it's a great example of something that was not done before, where they're able to actually not only sort of assess your credit, but then be able to spot if there's problems in it and let you know. And it's specifically geared towards women. And they've created a community around it where women are able to share tips and tricks. Again, connecting women who might have been in very isolated communities, being able to talk to each other in virtual settings can be really empowering. Another one is Support Pay, which is another company that we supported, where they are helping facilitate child support payments. What we found is that, as we know, women often sort of bear the brunt of caring for their children, and it's particularly challenging sometimes getting child support. So this actually increases the likelihood of exchanging child support by 90%. So being able to sort of, and again, this is all virtual tools that help enable to actually make the payments, make it accountable, actually help the courts track if those payments are made. All of these are sort of technology tools that we really didn't have before. And I think so the more, one of our big insights has been, if we really want to serve women, sort of technology is really going to sort of pave the way for us to do this in a way that's not only sort of better, creating better tools, but also sort of can reach the, billions of women globally who are sort of struggling with these issues.
That's great. So Samantha, we all know, like we kind of think about our financial picture over the next week, the next month, and maybe even the next year, but oftentimes we're not thinking about it, what is it going to be in 5 years or in 10 years? So it's back to that short term versus long term. How do you start or at least engage in that conversation? What are the things that you might say or the tools that you have them think about it so that they can really think long but also prepare for the short term?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are focused on the short term, and I usually always still try to get them to identify a long-term goal, whether it be home ownership, retirement, starting a business, or paying for education, because without that long-term goal, it's just, you're not going to set yourself up for success long-term, and you're just going to be putting out fires and crises. So most households go through financial shocks. There's all studies out there, like you said, about the not coming up with $400 without selling something. So to break that cycle of crisis after crisis and to be able to endure a financial shock, you really have to think long term. And if they have children, it's usually, that's the motivation for long term, is your children, your own retirement, your own safety. No one wants to be working when they're 80. So just kind of opening their mind and coaching them through that of, we can put out these fires and try to get out of debt and raise your credit score, but long term, how are you going to prevent this from happening again? And that's usually a big motivator.
Right. That's great. I'm going to switch over now to entrepreneurship. Women are the fastest growing subset of business owners in the United States, and according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the number of women-owned businesses has increased 45% since 2007, and that's 5 times more than all businesses. Over the same period, businesses owned by women of color have increased 126%, more than 10 times the national average. Despite this, though, the research commissioned by the National Women's Business Council in 2014 reported that women start companies with 50% less capital than men do, and it's well known that they still face these unique barriers to success. So Ranjini, with that, what are some of the resources you took advantage of as you started to build your business and accumulate wealth, and what are some of the obstacles that you faced in that process?
Sure. So I think we started Artech, or I came back, let me phrase it a different way. I came back to Artech full time for pretty much the same reason a lot of other women do. I was working in a large professional environment and at a large Wall Street firm, and I had 2 children, and I did not feel like I would be able to move forward in my career at this firm. I mean, I would have had to work 100+ hours a week, and it just wouldn't have been feasible with the kids. I mean, I don't know if I would have done it anyways, but it definitely wasn't going to be feasible if I was going to have any sort of family life. So there was no way to become a partner at the firm. And so I kind of started to look around and see, okay, what do I do with my life? And I did want to stay in the workforce and do something of that sort. And my husband and I had started this company several years ago. And I looked for other legal jobs, but then ultimately decided to join the business. It was a difficult decision, but it turned out to be one of the best decisions in my life. But in terms of getting access to capital, even then we were a very small business, and it was very difficult to sort of continue to grow and compete with other larger businesses. But I think I was chatting with someone about this yesterday at another event, and I feel like what happens with women-owned businesses is you don't cross that line necessarily where you become that credible customer for a bank. And it's really important to cross that line where banks are willing to lend you money. And it could be the line will differ depending on the industry and the type of business, but it's that scale that you need to reach. And once you reach that, it's limitless. I mean, everyone wants to lend you money, right? But the question is, how do you get to that point? So I think many industries today that women go into, if you manage it well internally, you can generate enough revenue to support your growth. It's only when you want to accelerate growth or really reinvest that you need significant amounts of money that are not possible. So
Right.
I don't know if that's a...
No, absolutely. And we know female business owners do have a hard time accessing capital until they get to a certain point. And so with that, Colleen, what are some of the emerging technology issues to handle? Why is that? Help us understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, from our perspective, owning a business is, here in the US, it's the second largest form of equity that most people have after their home. For us, it's one of the key wealth building strategies that we deploy to help women acquire wealth. And yet, exactly to your point, that we still see these significant challenges around accessing capital, the lack of peer network support or training around some of the challenges they're facing. And this piece about the lack of access to capital is so critical because, and this is a global issue. Their estimates show that 70% of, women-led small businesses struggle financing their businesses. So this is a huge gap. And we typically sort of break it out into what we see as sort of those high-growth businesses, which is exactly as you mentioned, Ranjini, sort of facing that sort of valley of death or that funding gap. And often that's because only 1% of venture capital financing is going to women-led companies. And part of that you could also trace to the fact that not many women are actually employed or leading these venture capital firms. In fact, when we see them leading the venture firms, they tend to invest more in women-led firms. So that's sort of one piece of this. But the second piece of it is sort of the micro-entrepreneurship side. So how do we help bridge sort of these sort of gaps to getting the financing they need to get started? Especially since most of the small businesses that we see that are women-led tend to be very small. For example, here in the US, only 2% of the firms that are women-led have more than 100 million in revenue. So these are typically sort of smaller businesses that we're seeing who are struggling with these issues. And we've been supporting a lot of micro-entrepreneurship programs who are helping sort of think about new financing mechanisms of giving people credit. So we're actually, through technology, seeing totally new underwriting models where we can look at maybe some of the traditional underwriting criteria have really sort of actually worked against women because there might be structural barriers that have gone into that of why they don't have certain some of the traditional underwriting criteria metrics. And so technology is changing that, where we're able to look at different things about your spending and your borrowing behaviors and how we could actually use that to underwrite a loan. Or we're also able to sort of think about new ways of delivering technical assistance or credit building support to sort of help people who maybe aren't ready yet. But technology enables us to sort of provide credit building products where people can sort of overcome the challenges so that they're ready for a loan. But I will say, we even see with micro-entrepreneurship programs, they often struggle. The demand is higher than what they can serve. So they have to think differently about how do they scale their programs given the demand. And that's where technology can play a role. But we're also seeing new models of collaboration. So we're seeing these programs come together in different ways where they can pool their talent, their capital, in a way that they can actually deliver better services to women-led firms. And a good example is here in New York, where we've got a great partnership with 3 organizations focused on helping underrepresented small businesses, Accion, Excelsior Growth Fund, and Renaissance Development Corporation. We're coming together to say, look, we've all been trying to figure out how we help micro-entrepreneurs. Why don't we, instead of sort of recreating the wheel, let's come together and come up with a new model of how we can create efficiencies and serve this segment better. So I think we'll start to see more of those trends of sort of how we can sort of overcome some of these gaps.
So Samantha, what are the tools that you talk to some of your folks about in helping in this area?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One is connecting them to microfinance resources, like you mentioned Accion. Kiva also does sources lending from family members or from people around the globe that want to donate to your business, because most women businesses that I see are too small to be at the point where they can go into a normal bank. And there's also a large gap of understanding. So a lot of people quit their job to start a business, but with no income, it's hard to get a loan. So I usually refer people also to the Small Business Administration, and they have knowledge centers and community centers you can go to and get coaching on what you need to get a business loan and the steps to take before you actually walk into a bank. So to build your own personal savings, usually you want to have 20, 30% to put down to secure the loan because they want to see you're investing in your own company. And you want to have a good personal credit score. So a lot of people think that it's going to be separate. You can not look at your personal credit score, but that is a real big factor in getting a business loan. So you want to prepare yourself for success before you go to a bank. Fix your credit score, get out of debt, have some sort of income, and maybe fund it yourself for a little while, or look at some of the microfinance institutions out there that work at a smaller level, Kiva, Acción in New York, things like that. And so you can pass the line to go to a bigger bank once you're at that bigger level.
Ranjini, so what advice would you give to somebody who's wanting to start a new business today?
I would really say that, first identify what your strengths are and create a business plan. It doesn't have to be a 20-page document, but whatever it is, write it down. I mean, what are you going to sell? Who are you going to sell it to? What makes you different? What's your competitive advantage that someone's going to buy it from you as opposed to anyone else? It sounds really basic. And then also create a projected budget for the next year or two. I mean, all of this sounds extremely basic, but a lot of people, not just women, go into business without having thought about, without thinking about why will someone buy from you? I mean, it doesn't matter what the field is. Everything is competitive, right? There's a player in every field or multiple players in every field. So just because you've put your shingle out there doesn't mean someone's going to buy from you. So really think about that, and then understand whether your personal strengths match up to what your business is trying to achieve. And if there are certain areas that you don't have strengths in, whether it's finance or sales or what have you, then you have to figure out a way to bridge that gap, whether it's through having a partner or employees or what have you. Right?
So before I wrap up here, any questions out there that we're happy to take before we summarize here? Anybody have any thoughts or any questions? Back there, yeah, go ahead. I'll repeat it, or you can come up.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Vishnu. I work for the Ranjini Speaks. We work a lot with the South Asian women, and basically they do like babysitting and nails and eyebrow and those kind of business, work they do, but they are dying to start their own business because they work for other people, right? And making like $2 per hour, making the nails and everything. So they come to me and ask me like what can they do to start their own business? And I have been talking to some, lenders, and they need like good credits, credit history, and like immigration status, and all those things. And how can they get those kind of services if they don't have good credit, and they don't have like citizenship? Is there any way that those people are qualified, to get a loan, a small loan, to start the business?
It's a great question. I don't know if Samantha or Colleen want to.
You want to go first? Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think we see this problem a lot, and actually we fund quite a few programs that are specifically targeting those types of populations to build their credit, even though they might not be they might not even be citizens, or they might not have the traditional sort of taxpayer identification numbers, or they might just have no credit at all. And so one example is Mission Asset Fund, which is one of our partners, who has created a product where people can come together in a lending circle, and they pool their capital. Each one of them takes out the loan at one time, and they report the repayments to the credit bureau. So these are people who typically don't necessarily have credit, but for the first time they're establishing credit. And then we're putting them on the path to sort of joining the formal financial system. Because again, what we found is similar to you. These are often people who are working very hard, but they're operating in the informal economy. So how do we sort of use those types of tools to bring them into formal economy? And so happy to share others as well as examples. But.
Yeah, same sort of thing. If they don't have a social security number, they can get an ITIN. It's a taxpayer identification number, and they can start building credit under that number. The institutions that I know that would lend under that type of number are mostly in New York City and things like that. So if they're there, I could connect you to resources. They have credit builder loans, or if you've never had credit before, it's kind of like a savings account, but they report to the credit bureau. So you go paying, and then at the end, you get the money. So women can do it for $500 over 12 months. It's pretty affordable. They only pay $43 a month. And then at the end, you have 12 months of credit history, and you have $500 of savings. So that's a really safe, affordable way to do it. And documenting the income, I know a lot of people don't want to document income, but in order to get a loan, you're going to need to prove you have some sort of income. So getting people to start to document their income and getting that taxpayer identification if they don't have immigration status are the first steps, I'd say.
That's great. So before we wrap up here, I want to ask each of you to quickly, in 30 seconds or less, what one piece of advice you want to give to our audience here. So let's start with you.
I would say, I mean, I think this ties into what you were saying that, you know, women in particular perhaps don't do, is really think for the long term, you know, instead of living your life for the short term. I think in order to, whether you want to start a business, have financial security, save to have children, buy a house, whatever it is, you need to think several years out, and you know, in order to do that, so that you have those options in the future, and you're not limited in terms of what you want to do.
Right, Samantha?
I would have to say to take an active approach in your finances. I think a lot of people don't want to face them, or they want to let someone else handle them. But I would say take an active approach. Don't let money slip through your fingers. I see a lot of people who think, oh, my next paycheck's coming. You know, they're counting on it. But you can lose your job, so you need savings, and know what's going on with your finances. Definitely just know what's going on and take an active approach.
Great.
I agree with both of those, but I would say maybe less from the individual perspective and more as all of you are now leaders on advancing these issues. You know, the more that we can understand what are the biggest problems, which is not going beyond just the income gap, but also understanding the wealth gap, means that we can advance more effective solutions. So the more that we can sort of work together to really understand what are driving those, what are the structural as well as sort of the other challenges that are getting in our way, and how can we overcome that, I just would really really welcome to have more people part of that conversation and figuring out how we can overcome those.
So great. I want to thank these great panelists, because at the end of the day, we as women, we need to educate ourselves. We need to put up our hands. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I think we heard that this morning from Katie K, about how we really need to ask those questions and spend a little time on investing in ourselves, because if we do that now, we'll get those dividends much later in life. So thank you all for being here, and we'll be around if we have questions even later and during the night.